Hello, I'm Joe Miglio from the Berklee College of Music. I'd like to thank you for joining me in this session on improving student success capacity and our readiness as institutions to support that goal. College student success is a major issue today in higher education. There's an enhanced and a critically urgent call to action that is required that we must answer. As we begin to assess the degree and dollar disparity that is going on for many of our students, we need to determine what the payoff is in terms of their education and the amount of time and money it will take to literally pay off that loan. There's a large gap among various racial and ethnic groups, and an unacceptable large dropout rate in that very audience. There's a reduced capacity for career sustainability and destructive debt that may leave the great American dream the great American nightmare. What I hope to be able to focus on with you is a conversation. One way in the beginning, of course, you're listening to this, but at some point we'll be able to get together and actually have a conversation around how we look for impact and how we look at impasse. We'll look together at the ways that we can discover and define infection points to move these ideas of success forward. And I hope to be able to uncover and disengage infection points and those elements that remove, reduce, or in other ways distort the ability for a student to be gainfully educated and find success. In order to do so, we'll need to begin to look at how we can recognize attributes and understand the current state in terms of how we assess it. We'll need to look at the ways by which we articulate the ideal state and look for ways to reframe and review the very acts of what we call education. And as a result of that, student success in the way by which we assess it. In many ways, it's going to be an iterative and interrogative process, a journey that we continue to repeat and look at as we move forward. In many ways, if student success is the eye on the prize that we all have, we need to have the structural capacity to keep our feet on the street. With regard to the how, we need to really look at what I call the triple A's: assess, analyze, and address. What does constitute student success? What supports it? What carries it forward in a specific, measurable, active, reactive, realistic, and time-bound way? Are we able to identify the strengths that we have as an institution in order to support the strengths that a student must have in terms of being successful? Are we able to identify our weaknesses? And as such, what are the priorities for our programs and for our institutions as we continue to move down this path of discovery and definement? This issue of student success and retention is clearly one that's been a part of the narrative of higher education for a long time. And as a result of that, there are multiple resources available from research foundations, as well as looking at educational policy and program initiatives, to a variety of career and college readiness practices. There are build your own programs out there and vendors. And one in particular that I'll be using in this presentation is by Hobson through their Starfish application. It's a determination tool that allows us to begin to look at key attributes and a series of questions that allow us to begin to ask the question, are we really student success ready? Many of these ideas are going to come from adaptations from the work of Barber, Rodriguez, and Artis in their work around Deliveralogy. Now, Deliveralogy is a term you may not have heard before, but it's one we've been practicing for a long time. Deliveralogy in and of itself is a quality improvement method. It's a way of being able to reach goals by building on what we have rather than really starting from scratch. It looks for ways that we can add structured and sustainable reflection time to those practices that we have and challenge the philosophies that are embedded behind them. It is an improvement and an implementation strategy model, and it tries to honor the already doing part of who we are, the purpose of what we do and how we serve it. It's also going to give us an opportunity to measure how's that working for you. And to ultimately ask ourselves the question, if that's our best, is there a better best? So really, the guiding questions that exist as a result of Deliveralogy can probably be best summed up like this. What exactly are we trying to do? How are we trying to do it? What is our system trying to do? At any given moment, how will we know whether we are on track to succeed? And if we are not on track, what are we going to do about that? Now, in order for that delivery method to actually be implemented, there are a variety of components that really go into that process. The first is to be able to actually develop a foundation for delivery. Secondly, to understand the delivery challenge in terms of our audience and our expectations, as well as the pre-existing assessments that we have done about that audience. We need to plan for the delivery, to actually drive that delivery, and then create an irreversible delivery culture. In many ways, success capacity and readiness can really be tied to a variety of B's. The first is building. What are we doing? The second is behaving. Are our actions in alignment with those things that we believe, our third B, are important? So building, behaving, and believing are a significant part of it. With those things in place, we begin to ask ourselves, who are we becoming as an institution? And ultimately, once we're able to put this building, this behaving, this believing, and becoming model together, we end up with an identity around our institutional readiness and our capacity to serve students and our commitment to their success. So building, behaving, believing, becoming, and being committed to the student success become an integrative model for institutional assessment. It involves the community, our strategies with the community, the analytics that we use based on the communities that we're a part of, what those actions are, and how we build outcomes as a result of them. So, with regard to readiness, there are some principles that we must look at with regard to assessment. The first is, do we understand what we're actually committed to? Do we understand the way by which we're going to develop a foundation for that student success? Do we understand the challenge that goes along with such a process? Are we able to plan to deliver on our goals, to drive implementation, and to ultimately be ready, willing, and able to be that student success driven, committed organization? Each of these elements have associated actions with them. Each have primary and secondary questions that must be considered. And each have a current time and a current rating. And we'll begin to look at those next. Before we begin to look at more detail at these readiness principles, I'd like to offer up the following as a current state kind of rating model. If we're familiar with the traffic light, red, amber, and green, stop, go, and that space in between, almost stopping or almost going, in many ways, we can actually use that same kind of color code to begin to look at each of these principles that we are calling foundational for student success, as well as the other principles that will follow it. So if you come to a red light when you're doing your assessment, we can assume that it's weak and that the actions are highly problematic and will require some urgent and decisive actions. If it's green, it's good, you're good to go. It may require some refinements, but overall we can consider it proficient. And then there's amber. Amber red, problematic and probably requires more activity. Or amber green, it's mixed, but the requirements of some actions are going to be there. But overall, it's good. So as we go through these questions, as we go through these elements, think about, are you red light? Are you green light? Are you amber red? Or are you amber green? With regard to the first readiness principle, develop the foundation for student success, let's look at this idea of how we define our aspiration. Does the institution have a clearly articulated and shared aspiration around student success? Red, green, amber red, amber green. Is it defined in terms of ambitious outcomes? Can it be translated into manageable goals? Are there clear and specific metrics in place? Is there the aspiration that is shared by all the relevant stakeholders that we're on the same page and going in the same direction? All of that is a part of how we begin to develop the foundation for student success by first defining our institutional aspiration. Red, green, amber red, or amber green. Another element in that developing the foundation for student success is how we engage with our community. Is there a group of key individuals that we know are influential in driving progress towards this aspiration for student success? Is there a team or teams of people responsible for driving the achievement of the institution's student success aspirations? Is there an identified, usually smaller group of influential individuals, academics, and administrators who support the aspiration and the work that's being done to achieve it? All of those variables and more are in the element that we would call engaging the campus community. Red, green, amber red, or amber green. Let's move on to that second principle, understanding the challenge. The first thing we want to be able to do is look at the element of how we evaluate our past and present performance. Red, green, amber red, amber green. Does the institution regularly and consistently use data to evaluate its performance in support of student success? Do we regularly analyze the data and look for recurring trends? Do we have access to relevant student success data, or do we know who to ask for it? Do we benchmark the data against our history within the institution and compare it with and against our peers? Each of these things will be a part of a model that helps us understand the challenge as we evaluate our past, present performance. Now, you know what I'm going to say next. Red, green, amber red, amber green. Another element in this second element of understanding the challenge is the drivers of performance themselves and the relevant institutional activities. Do we regularly analyze data to identify root causes for performance or performance failure? Do we as an institution have understanding of the full breadth of student success interventions and practices that are currently underway to help achieve that aspiration? Red, green, amber red, amber green. With regard to the third readiness principle, plan to deliver your goals, one of the critical elements that we want to be able to look at in this model is how we can design and draw on the delivery chain itself. Does the institution understand the chain through which implementation must occur? Do they understand the chain of campus actors and relationship of each of those actors in support of this model of student success and achievement that we have in place so that implementation can be incremental and staged in a way and built to scale? Do they articulate the delivery chain through their faculty to the students? Is it widely understood? Red, green, amber red, amber green. Another element in this third piece and principle of readiness is plan to deliver your goals is about setting targets and establishing trajectories. The question we want to ask ourselves here is, have the aspirational and associated goals been translated to concrete end targets and trajectories? Are the targets and trajectories rooted in evidence from past experiences, from analysis of predicted data, and other forms of research? You know what I'm going to say. Red, green, amber red, amber green. Each time we are looking at these elements, these principles for readiness, and we're asking ourselves, are we red? Are we green? Are we amber red? Are we green? It's a declaration of kind of the truth telling that we need to be able to do to be able to ask ourselves, is this our best? Is there a better best? The fourth attribute with regard to the principles of readiness is about how we actually drive implementation and delivery. In order to do that, we want to be able to look at establishing routines to drive and monitor performance. The questions we want to ask ourselves are things like, are there regularly results-driven conversations that allow for shared review of the actions and the performances that we are engaged in? Do we have a means to monitor those activities and the progress? Do these regularly structured conversations to review progress solve major challenges and make decisions to drive implementation forward? Again, you want to be able to determine your current state that can lead us towards a better best. Red, green, amber red, amber green. Additionally, with regard to this idea of driving implementation and its delivery, we probably need to also look at just how we solve problems early and rigorously. Are we engaged in a model of preventative, predictive assessment and analysis, or are we reactive and then working from the consequence model? In order to answer that question and to determine where your traffic light is, red, green, amber, green, we have to ask ourselves, is there a shared culture for problem solving inside of our institution? Is conflict, when it is discovered, when uncovered, managed in a proactive and a sensitive way? Are those communications and those solutions to those communications acted on in an efficient and an effective model? And if so, how do you know? Red, green, amber, green. Finally, let's come to the last element that Hobsons, through their starfish application, are talking about. And that's the final element in terms of understanding the readiness kind of principles and practices. Element 5, being a student-ready institution. In order to do that, we have to ask ourselves our questions around capacity and momentum sustainability. They go like this. Is building implementation capacity a priority for the institution, its leadership, and is it an ongoing endeavor? Does the institution maintain its focus through challenges and distractions as it continues to move towards a model of enhanced student success and sustainable models and practices associated with it? Does the institution regularly and deliberately assess the necessary skill and will of individuals throughout the institution to deliver on this aspiration of achievement and success? Do faculty, departments, and other stakeholders at the institution feel a sense of responsibility for student success? Are efforts and resources related to being a student-ready institution prioritized? Red, green, amber, green. Finally, as we look at this fifth element of being a student-ready institution, we come to the question of how, where, and in what ways do we communicate the message? We ask ourselves questions such as, does the institution regularly communicate about the aspirations and the strategies it's trying to achieve with regard to student success? Are the communications anchored in student success goals and strategies? Are they planned alongside of them and monitored accordingly? Are the communications two-way? Red, green, amber red, amber green. To reiterate, this model of deliveralogy is asking ourselves the questions that you just heard. Let me restate them. What exactly are we trying to do? How are we trying to do it? What is our system trying to do? At any given moment, how will we know whether we are on track to succeed or not? If we're not on track, what are we going to do about it? And again, these readiness principles and how we assess them are interdependent yet individual in terms of how we need to determine red, green, amber red, amber green. Again, the first readiness principle is developing the foundation for student success. Do we have a model, a baseline, a foundation for how we want to be able to articulate student success and achievement? The second element is, do we understand the challenge? The third is, how do we plan to deliver on the goals that we say are so critical to elements 1 and elements 2? What will we need to do to drive implementation? Finally, leading us to this important, conclusive fifth element, can we be a student-ready institution? Now, each of these 5 principles and the way by which we assess them are in a PowerPoint presentation that you will also receive as a part of today's review. And it'll go into more detail with some of the ways by which we can determine that traffic light, that red, green, amber red, and amber green. However, what we're looking at is our current time and our current state as a rating. And so to do that, we want to be able to ask ourselves with rigorous honesty, is this our best? Could there be a better best? When we talk about the ways by which student success is important to us, do we place that same level of emphasis in terms of the structures and the language and the application of that in the things that we're doing? In this brief amount of time, I hope I've been able to impress upon you the importance of what we all know is such a critical success factor for all of us, and that's student success. But instead of asking the question, what does the student need to be successful, with one finger pointing at the student, I'm suggesting we need to look at the 3 fingers pointing back at the institution to be able to ask ourselves, what are we doing in order for that student to be able to do what he or she is doing? Defining student success is a meaningful and measurable process. Assessment of students' short-term objectives relative to their long-term goals should align with our institutional priorities. We need to provide the right curricula, academic support, and services to help them achieve their goals, and for us to be able to articulate our goals in support of their achievement. Measures in achievements by establishing goals and expectations tied to student success, aspirations, and attainment should be an important, if not essential, element of all that we do on the academic and support services that we define to be student ready. If we focus on the entire student experience, what we begin to look at is ways by which we can assist each student on their journey that is intrinsically experienced and externally evidenced. And it must all begin with the institution. It's the institution and its leadership that defines direction, dedication, innovation at multiple levels, from the individual to the cultural to infrastructural, with a focus on creating a strong framework for student achievement and advancement. It's the institution that provides a range of approaches for building institutional capacity. And that institutional capacity in its commitment to student success by being student ready for that success journey that's about to be traveled. Wrapping it up, words matter. We can all find literature that says how committed we are to a student's success. We can find institutions that talk about what it means to be student-centered. The question is how do we make those words matter? And what are the materials and the mechanisms necessary for what matters and matters most to be measured? So it's about success by design and deliberation, using data and data-driven dialogue that I hope I was able to express in this short amount of time with you. It's about building, behaving, believing, becoming, and being student ready. And with that, our ability to determine how, where, and when student success and our capacity and our readiness as an institution are at the moment where we can begin to see sustainable and scalable growth. So with that, thank you very much. I look forward to our conversations, and I hope that you found this brief overview, if anything, instructive, informative, and maybe influential. But I know you probably walked away with one thing in your head: red, green, amber red, amber green. Thanks very much.